What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Buck3D's YouTube channel. This is step 4 in our beginner's guide to 3D printing. And in this video, we're going to be going over supports. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our slicer here. You're going to see I made a quick T out of two rectangular primitives. And what we're going to do is turn on our supports. So go over to the support tab. You're going to see enable support. And when I first preview the object, with no settings changed, you're going to see I have these trees here. Now, if you don't see this view and it looks like the object's all one color, go to the top right. You'll see it says color scheme. If you're under summary or filament, it's going to show you all one color. I like to be on line type so I can see where the supports are separating from my object. Now, if you don't have supports on and you try to preview an object that clearly needs supports, if I go over to slice, it's going to warn me that I have too much of an overhang, and you're going to see that bridging right there, where you'll probably have a very bad print where the filament will just either fall to the plate or try to bridge as much as possible and have a lot of drooping. All right, so I'm going to enable my support, go over to tree, and I'm going to also select the normal. So what that's going to do is change the pattern to more of a grid. This doesn't really change the time too much depending on the model. So I'm an hour and 14 minutes for model printing time. If I go over to tree, you'll see it's an hour and 14 minutes. So it changed 1 minute for my total time, but for the model itself, it really didn't make much of a difference. Now, if you're doing something a lot bigger or maybe like a small minifigure where it's going to surround the entire thing with the grid support, that might be a problem and cause a lot longer of a print. Okay, so I personally like to use Tree Auto. I'll stick with the default a lot of the time, but sometimes if I'm doing something really small and I don't want a ton of supports, I'll go to Tree Slim, which does save you a lot of time. As you can see, it went down like 10 minutes. So when it comes to using Tree Strong, if you want one big piece that you can kind of just break off, this usually is the best option. So if you have a large flat surface, you can use Tree Strong. It will make one big base on the bottom and then an easy snap off for the top. Now you'll see there's kind of like a dark green layer here. What this is called your top interface layer, and you'll see it's kind of separate from the tree itself. So this is what helps you actually connect all the trees together and pop off the support at the same time. You can increase this by going down to the Advanced tab, top interface layer, and going to 4. I like to have more of a top interface layer if I'm doing a very flat surface like this one. It seems to break off a lot easier. Now, if you don't see that top interface layer setting, it's because you have the Advanced tab selected off. So if I were to go to there, you won't see any of those settings. Click it, and now I'll see a lot more. Now I'm going to select back to default because this is what I use the most. But if you see when I slice my model and I click back up here, you're going to see a slight gap between the support and the object itself. Now, you want that because the slight gap, yes, it might cause some imperfections on the model. Usually not if you have your support settings right, especially with those interface layers. But if you have too much of a gap, it will cause major problems. Now, the way to change that gap is to go down to top Z distance. It's selected at 0.2. So that gap right there is 0.2 millimeters. If I were to go to 0, for example, it's going to make it so that the support is touching the object with no gap. But the issue with that is then it's going to stick to it. So it's going to be impossible to get those supports off. My personal preference, I've been sticking to 0.22 to 0.24, and that causes enough of a gap to not stick and to still come off super easily. So here's that gap with the 0.22. Now, there is a setting called support raft base and support raft interface, which allows you to use other materials as your support interface. So let's say, for example, I add another filament. Make sure it's not the same filament because if you're using the same filament, they will bond to each other. We're going to use a PETG. So if we have PETG here and we use this setting, you're going to see I select support / raft interface. It's going to make my top Z distance 0. So what that's doing is it's going to connect the object. And let's go back to filament. You're seeing it's connecting the object to here, but the reason it's not going to stick is because they're separate filaments, which means they don't melt at the same temperatures, and it will cause them to break away from each other and not adhere. Now, that is more of an advanced setting, but it is really nice to know that you can actually make the surface perfect and have the filament almost like literally touching the object. But you need to make sure you have the right settings on and that you know how to use your AMS machine correctly, which again, we'll get into more of this stuff later on in our steps. Now you'll see there's also a setting. It says support critical regions only. If you select that, it's going to only put the amount of supports that it thinks it really, really needs in order to make the model without it failing. But personally, I usually just either paint my own supports, which I'm going to show you in a second, or I just let the slicer do its job without the support critical regions only, because I don't mind having more supports since my supports are dialed in. I obviously won't use this one. It automatically changed this for the 0 distance here, but I do like using the trees and letting it go and really not worrying about trying to save a little bit of material for the risk of the object breaking. So now when it comes to painting supports, all you have to do is select the type, and you'll see there's 2 options for manual. Manual means that you're selecting where you want the supports, and if you mess up and you don't have the supports in the right spot, the print's going to fail. So we're going to select tree manual. We're going to go back to prepare, and you're going to see there's a little option here that says supports painting, or push the L key. So click that. I'm going to go over to the area I think needs the support, which we know is this overhang here. If I select it with the fill button, it's going to fill in this whole region here. And you can change that smart fill angle to be lower. Because I have such a flat faces here, it's not going to change anything. If I were to have an object that has a ton of triangles, it will let me select to the smallest triangle. And then if I increase the smart fill angle, it will try to detect a whole region. Now, another cool feature is being able to block out supports. So let's say I have this whole piece that needs supports, but I don't want this middle section here to have supports. I can just use this paint tool and right click instead of left click. And you'll see that when I generate my supports, there's a slight circle in the middle where there won't be any supports. Now, the last setting is just your support speed. If you go over to the speed tab and you scroll down, you'll see an option for support. If you'd like to slow down your supports, sometimes that can be really helpful to make it so that the supports aren't breaking off of the plate. If the diameter of the supports are super thin, which is under this tree support setting, sometimes they'll break off if there's a lot of vibration or the nozzle gets close and maybe you have a setting wrong, it will break off. So just make sure that you have your bed temps correct so that the tree supports can stick properly. If you really need help, you can use brims for the objects, but personally with my settings, I haven't needed to use that. So yeah, that concludes the support video. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. I know it was a quick rundown and there's a lot more to supports, but we're going to get into that a little further down the road. This is more just to give you a base for how to start using supports. So I'll see you in the next video. Check out the other steps. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section.